Hello and welcome to our next instalment for our Thought Leadership webinar series. Our topic for today is Beyond the Process, Payroll as a Strategic Business Partner. The payroll function is far more than a transactional cost centre. As payroll professionals attain specialist qualifications, we find the industry is benefiting. Modern payroll practitioners are strategic thinkers, focused on ensuring compliance, gaining efficiencies and creating data insights that inform business planning. Today I have the pleasure of talking to Tracy Angwin, CEO of the Australian Payroll Association, as we will discuss how to make payroll a profit centre, the relationship between people, process and technology, how to defend against payroll fraud, and steps to make payroll a strategic partner. Thank you so much for joining me today, Tracy. It's good to see you again.
It's a pleasure, Ariella. Nice to be here.
Thank you. Tracy, you're a proponent of payroll as a profit centre rather than a cost centre.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us an overview of how we can achieve this as an organisation?
Sure. What we find is that organisations that get their three things right as part of their payroll delivery strategy can absolutely have a tangible impact on the bottom line. Those three things are their people, so people in the pay office, how that's structured, who they are, whether you've got the right skills and competencies. Then the technology, obviously you've got to have fit for purpose technology and you've got to be using it correctly. And the third thing is the underlying payroll process. If we get those three things right, plus the actual delivery strategy, how you actually deliver payroll to your organisation, we know that it impacts the bottom line.
In your latest book, you speak about the intersection of compliance and efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that there's a trade-off with efficiency if an organisation is going to ensure compliance?
Absolutely there is. You can't have the most efficient payroll and the most compliant. It's more like a pendulum, I think, and it depends on a lot of things where that pendulum sits for you. We find, we work with a lot of financial services firms, so they are much more interested in compliance over efficiency. They will pay more for their payroll operation just to ensure that it's compliant. And other organisations, sort of more, a retailer, for example, they potentially willing to, to trade off, not saying that they don't want to be compliant, it's just that they might take, have a shorter process, which means they're more efficient and just make sure that their governance and controls still work in a compliant manner, but they might not have the same checks and balances than, say, a financial services firm.
Okay, so with that in mind, what might the potential pitfalls or problems a firm would encounter when an intersection between, say, the compliance and the efficiencies aren't being met?
Well, I suppose it's if you're trying to have both, because like you said before, there is a trade-off, and you can't really have both. What we find though is that sometimes an organisation and a payroll function will try to become more compliant just by doing more manually, by doing more checks, for example. So that's a really inefficient way to run payroll, is to do anything manually that employs, it means that you've got to have more humans in the pay office. What we find better, which actually gives better compliance, is really tight governance and control. So work those out first, and then you will be closer to both compliance and efficiency in the pay office.
Okay, so how do we gain efficiencies in payroll then?
Where do you want to start? It's a really great question. And I think a lot of people might answer it differently, but the way I would do it is, and the way I do it, is I first look at the process. What's the current process now? Where are there issues around efficiency, manual work? Where are the sticky notepads happening in the pay office? You can go into a pay office and you can see literally sticky notepads on a computer, or you can see where people use spreadsheets, and look at the process first. That will then determine what rabbit holes that you can go down in terms of efficiency. But normally by getting someone to talk through the payroll process and then watch them do it will give you some clues as to where the efficiencies lie in a payroll operation.
Okay, so I guess the crux of your argument is that the intersection of people, processes and technology enables payroll to become a profit centre.
Totally.
Okay.
So,
How does that all work?
Well,
yeah, tell us.
everything. You have to get the three things right. So I often say to people, there's only three things you need to get right in payroll. It's people, technology, and processes.
Sounds simple, right?
Exactly. So in terms of people, you've got to have the right structure of team, and you've got to have people with the right competencies. And this is tougher than it sounds in payroll, because you often don't know if you've got a capable payroll professional until they've been there a while, or often in times when they leave. So we want to see people with competency-based qualifications. We want to have people who've had really good experience over different types of payroll functions. I often say that not to confuse expertise with experience, because someone can have deep expertise with a smaller amount of experience over someone who's got many, many years of experience, but actually the expertise is not so deep. So first of all, it's the right people and the right structure in the pay office. The second thing is the technology. You've got to have technology that's fit for purpose, that works with not just in the pay office, but it works with your other stakeholders, IT, HR, finance, operations people, and also the actual employees. How are they engaging with the pay office? And the third thing is the processes. So anything, you can have the best people in the world, you can have the best payroll team, and you can have the best payroll technology, but if your processes are flawed, you just won't have an efficient pay office.
Okay, got a question for you. Given your extensive experience in this industry, how would you structure the perfect payroll team?
Oh my goodness. It actually depends on the industry. It's not so much the payroll industry, it's the employer industry. So my answer would differ depending on whether I was in hospitality or retail or financial services or manufacturing. But essentially what every organisation needs is the ability to have payroll expertise, either in-house or outsourced, so access to that expertise. And you also need someone, and it could be the same person, who can take that payroll operational knowledge and be that interface with the employer, with the stakeholders, with the line managers, with finance. So the best payroll manager is not the best person to process pays. It's the person who understands how payroll can actually work as an asset to the business, not just a back office function.
Okay, so I guess with that in mind, I think our audience is going to want to know, what are the sort of qualifications that we want our payroll professionals to have these days?
So glad you asked me this. It's my favourite topic. Up until about 7 years ago, there were no payroll qualifications. There were no formal qualifications, competency-based on the Australian Qualifications Framework. So we've developed these, and they are a Certificate 4 in Payroll Administration, which is your operational payroll qualification. And then there's a Diploma of Payroll Management, which is more about managing the payroll function. So that's about extracting the value and how do we actually add that value to the employer. The Cert 4 is, I'll tell you a story if you want about how we got these through the Australian Qualifications Framework.
Yes, I'm sure our audience would love to hear about them.
I'm very grey under this hair dye, actually, from it. I'm not from the vet sector, but really, any industry has qualified professionals. I mean, you don't go to your dentist and expect that they're not qualified, or your optometrist, or we expect our accountants and our HR team to be qualified.
Absolutely.
So, because there was no payroll qualifications, I decided how hard can it be to develop a payroll qualification? So I made some inquiries, and everybody told me it would never happen. It was too specific. So I ended up meeting this lady who said, I just helped an organisation get a Cert 3 in orchid growing through ASQA, and I thought, this is the lady I need to deal with.
Wow.
So we worked together for about 2 years and developed these qualifications, and we've now had hundreds of graduates of these programs, and we're actually finding that it really improves not only the deliverables that they deliver to their employer, but it actually delivers a much better working experience for the qualified person, because they feel confident now that they have the knowledge, they have the expertise that they can, that they can share with HR, with finance. So, we really believe that is a baseline to anyone who works in payroll, and we're seeing employers now asking for these qualifications.
Excellent work to you and the team there, Tracy.
Thank you.
Well done. You were talking before about the technology as an enabler.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, can you give me an idea of some of the emerging technologies that are happening in the payroll landscape, and how do we think that they're going to add value to an organisation?
That's, in the last 2 years, I've seen more developments in this area than I have in the previous 20. And some really, really good things are happening. And what I'm seeing software developers think about is not just what happens in the pay office, but what happens in the broader employment area. What happens when someone comes to work?
Yes.
What happens when you employ someone? What happens to their data? What happens when someone's terminated? What is the interaction with the employees with the pay office through modern technologies? I'm seeing huge uptake in mobile capability, not just employee self-service, mobile capability, interacting this with the GPS. I was talking to an employer the other day, and they've got a system, or they're putting in a system where just by someone turning up on site,
Yes.
when their mobile phone connects with the GPS or the geolocation of that site, it clocks them on.
Wow.
So no
Incredible.
longer, we don't even need finger scanners and
Not a manual
facial
intervention anymore, is there?
None of that.
Yeah.
So they can just turn up. One of the things that I have seen, we've got quite a large client in the hospitality industry.
Yes.
And I was talking to the head chef, and he said the biggest issue that he has with getting his staff to work is that in a kitchen environment, it's a little bit wet, and they've got these finger scanners.
Oh, yes.
And he says sometimes I'll turn up to work and I'll see 10 of my chefs waiting in line to clock on.
Oh dear.
So he just says, we don't bother. I just say, get to work. Yeah, exactly.
Of course.
So that really impacts productivity. And, what they thought would be an enabler actually was...
Been a deterrent, really, hasn't
totally,
it?
yeah, exactly. So that's a really good example of how an industry-specific process would be affected by technology.
Okay. So I guess what's going to be important today is understanding then what considerations should an organisation need to take on board if they're thinking about adopting some of these new technologies in payroll?
I think that the first thing an organisation has to think about is not the technology. I know that sounds stupid, but it's what are you trying to get done? Is it engagement? Is it efficiency? Is it, is there a wider transformational project happening? And how can new technology and payroll and mobile and how can that actually have an impact on the transformation that you're trying to get done? Okay. So, and once you marry that, you'll have a much better chance of actually having a fit for purpose, great ROI on a project.
Yeah.
Whereas I think we focus as an industry and as buyers far too much on just the technology as a standalone piece. Look at what the functionality that something can do. Well, that's cool, but how does it actually work? Not just in the pay office, but in the wider employee community.
We all want the latest and the greatest, don't we?
Totally.
All of the time, regardless.
Like I love, we talk about, there's a few vendors out there who are demonstrating voice technology.
Oh.
Hey Alexa, blah, 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 or hey Google. And I get it, it's kind of cool and it demonstrates well, but I don't know one payroll manager that's going to say, hey Google, how many pays outstanding have I got? And Google's going to come back and go,
this is my leave liability
whatever,
reporting
because
and things.
we're also in a really confidential environment.
Of course.
So, we can go too far with technology. I mean, I'm happy to be proved wrong. I hope that vendors watching this go, what a load of rubbish. Tracy needs to know how we can... And I'd love to know, and Frontier might be able to tell me something that you're developing, which actually has an application, but I haven't quite got there yet with voice. But definitely mobile, GPS, all the geofencing stuff is very, very exciting right now.
No, I think I agree with you there, and I think our audience will too.
Good.
So as the author of several books now, congratulations.
Thank you.
You discuss payroll processes, specifically governance and risk, payroll fraud, as well as payroll benchmarking. Can you start by telling us a little bit about governance as a process?
Yeah, well, I guess governance, not even so much as a process, should just be something that your process is built on. So really, the way I think about governance is what are the rules that we can design that make sure we've got appropriate controls in place, and then what are the ways that we can then check against that how can we remain accountable to those rules. And really that's all governance is.
Okay.
So I kind of almost think about it as a bit of a, I go into if I'm looking at something, a payroll process from a governance point of view, I'm thinking about how I can break it.
Yes. Okay.
How can I rip off the company?
Mm-hmm.
How can I, and because if I can, it means there aren't appropriate controls.
Okay.
And then we just build those controls into it.
Perfect.
So there are plenty of ways that that employees and payroll staff and managers can do the wrong thing.
Oh, we've seen so many high-profile cases, haven't we, in the last few years?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people in jail because of it.
Yeah.
So I just look at all the things that I've learned through all those stories
Yes.
and think, how can I break your system?
Okay.
And then if I can't, or if my team can't, you've probably got some pretty decent governance and controls.
Okay, excellent. So what fundamentals can you recommend to us to defend against fraud and things like payroll errors, etc., as you were just sort of saying?
Well, definitely good controls, good processes.
Yep.
I think, fraud's a really interesting one. And again, we focus on the technology, but we've got to think broader than that. Sonia Causa, who was the payroll manager at Clive Peters,
Yes.
she stole $18 million over, about 18 months.
Yeah.
And no one thought it was unusual that this lady who was paid about $120,000 a year bought 44 investment properties in and around Melbourne in 18 months. No one thought that was strange. So that's the first thing that was, it wasn't about looking at the payroll reports.
No.
It was about what is the behaviour of someone who's in control of the payroll.
Yes.
There was no one thought that was unusual. And the thing with payroll fraud is there's normally one of three things going on. There's either addiction, and that might be, it's typically gambling, but it's
Yes.
also drugs.
Okay.
There's, obviously living beyond your means.
Yes.
And oftentimes we see those who have been convicted of payroll fraud have got some sort of obviously financial pressure, and it's often around marriage breakdown.
Okay.
And then with payroll problems and underpayments, we know that the press love a good payroll underpayment
Don't they
story.
just?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And they love to name and shame. And there's strategies that employers use, and we've worked on a lot of these situations where there have been underpayments. Employers find out about it, and then they've got to manage the media. My absolute pet hate is when they come out and they say, it was the system's problem. The system got it wrong. It was the old system. It's never, Ariella, the system's fault.
Yes.
It is 100% someone's fault who made the decision on how to set the system up.
Yeah.
I can't call Bill Gates and say, Bill, my Excel spreadsheet is not calculating how I expect it to be, because he'll go, well, there's a problem in the formula.
Absolutely.
He's not going to take my call. And likewise, I don't think we should blame payroll systems for payroll errors. There's this thing around setting and forgetting
Okay.
payroll technology.
Yes.
So you set it up
Yep.
and you never look at it again.
Yes.
And that is absolutely rampant through the payroll industry, because what happens is even small errors become large over a large employee population.
Of course.
And if you've set it and forget it and you never check, and there's
Yes.
not, regular reviews on your payroll setup or regular compliance audits, you will end up potentially getting these large surprises, which unfortunately many employers do regularly.
Okay. Tracy, you mentioned the word strategy. So I know that you're such an advocate for payroll teams having a strategy. I guess, how does payroll become a strategic component rather than just a transactional component
Yep.
in an organisation?
So a couple of ways. There's two things I think about with payroll strategy. One is payroll delivery strategy. So are you the type of employer that should be managing their payroll in-house? Or should you look to find an outsourced payroll provider or a managed payroll provider to take that off your hands?
Yep.
There's lots of things to consider around that, and sometimes outsourcing is absolutely the right strategy. Sometimes it's not the right strategy. The time when it's 100% not the right strategy is if you've got payroll problems and you say, and I see a lot of HR managers say this to me, there's all sorts of payroll problems, so we're just going to outsource it.
Oh.
Or outsource the problem.
Make it go away, isn't it?
It never makes it go away. It always makes the problem bigger. All you're going to do is
course.
amplify it because
Yeah.
the problems aren't actually in the system. They're in the things that lead up to the system, which is you can't outsource.
Yeah.
So that's the one thing on outsourcing. But I've seen outsourcing work really well in lots and lots of different environments, particularly employers with that sort of sub 500 where they don't want to have, the payroll, they don't want to pay for the payroll expertise that they might otherwise need.
Not their core business, typically, isn't it?
It's totally not their core business.
We could do a whole nother webinar on this.
Exactly,
What do you think?
Exactly. So, and the other thing with payroll strategy is how it relates to the wider business. So things like what I've seen work really well is a retailer is going to start open a new retail store. You've got an extraordinary amount of data that's sitting in a payroll database that you can use to model a new retail site, for example. So I'm seeing not enough employers using this to really analyse the data that they've got to help them with their broader strategy. So it doesn't have to be payroll strategy. It can be what is the business strategy and how can the payroll information that we've got really support that.
Okay. So your book discusses how payroll data can produce valuable insights that inform decision making. Tell me about
Absolutely.
that.
Well, this is, again, the data that we have in a payroll system is huge. And
Yeah.
you've got data over time. So we can look at trends. We can say, what are our leave trends? What are our, how does that relate to, like, overlay, workers' comp claims with, with attendance data. I've seen really great outcomes with employers who look at things like, you might look at the age of your staff, where they live in relation to the office they work in, and the length of time they've been at your employer. And I've seen organisations being able to really accurately predict, say, who are the next 5 people that are going to leave.
Oh, wow.
Based on the employee's age, the employee's location,
Yes.
and the length of service.
Excellent.
So these are the sorts of things that we can use our payroll data for that very few employers are thinking about.
Okay. So let's assume that I wanted to completely review my payroll functions, including people, maybe the technology, as well as the processes.
Yep.
What do you recommend that I need to consider to make sure that my project isn't a complete failure and ends up on page 1 of the paper?
Yeah, no, we don't want that. We're in the business of keeping our clients out of the Fairfax press.
Yes.
So there's three things. So the first thing is you asked about people. We need to find a way to understand and assess their knowledge. So, for example, how we do that is we have a payroll knowledge assessment. It's online. It's 35 multi-choice questions, and it gives us a really good flavour as to what the actual capabilities are and in terms of payroll knowledge in the pay office. And then if you've got a large payroll team, we overlay those together and we can see if there are actually knowledge gaps in your team. So, and that can identify training that's required, and sometimes that's just a really quick, easy fix. It's just adding the right training.
Okay.
With processes, again, it's about going in. I always like to follow the data. So I go in and I say, right, what happens when someone's employed?
Okay.
Where does that data go?
Okay.
And then what happens when someone turns up for work? Where does that data go and what happens to it? And how do you take attendance data and turn that into data that needs to go into the payroll based on the industrial instruments that you have?
Okay.
And then the third thing is technology. I mean, again, this whole set and forget thing, I think, is the most dangerous thing with technology. I always encourage people to talk to technology vendors, even if you don't have a project on. I've learned some fantastic things for our clients off when they're not even looking for technology. But just because you're using a technology in a certain way, you could actually learn from other people, either using the same technology and doing things that you didn't even think of.
Yep.
Or you might learn from someone else's technology and you might phone up your vendor and say, hey, is this capability available? Because what we find is, particularly over time, if you've had a piece of software for a long period of time, so more than 5 years, you're most likely not using it to anywhere near the extent that you could. Because there's been upgrades over those last 5 years, and the chances are that your pay office hasn't actually implemented those things. and you're not taking advantage of the technology that you've got.
Tracy, that actually sounds really interesting. I think that the audience, and I know I'm definitely keen to understand, what's actually involved? Like, how do I go about attaining some of these sorts of qualifications?
Well, the Cert 4 is actually a big Cert 4.
Yeah.
It's 14 units, and it covers the practical side of payroll. So the things you would expect in a payroll qualification, you know, super and industrial arrangements and all of those things that you do, leave and those really functional topics. So we deliver it online. So, you know, it's very hard to deliver, you know, we're not getting thousands of people wanting to do payroll qualifications. So you can't just have classroom-based training all over the country. So we delivered it all online, but it's very, very high touch with the trainers. And the diploma is a management diploma with a subject matter, I guess, of payroll. So it's about managing teams, managing the audit processes, managing the information that goes to stakeholders, communication, taking that sort of data in an analytical way and feeding that back to the employer. So they're quite different. We do have some sort of senior people who've been in payroll a long time saying, I just want to do the diploma because it's higher. It's not necessarily the case. It's do you want the functional qualification or do you want the management qualification?
Understand. That makes good business sense. So earlier we were talking about the efficiencies. I guess one thing that I'm sitting here thinking about is, how do we measure efficiency then? How do we know if we're actually being successful in achieving this?
Yeah, it's really a good question because it's one of those things, you know, what doesn't get measured doesn't get managed. So the way that we measure it is we break it down to a cost per pay slip. So it's pretty simple. We take the entire cost of your payroll function, so your people, your technology, your travel, your training, your paper, heaven forbid that you've got paper in your pay office, but some people still do. We have a client that was in the press for having some 200,000 paper timesheets, and we had them in our office for 4 months, so we know what that looks like. It's not good.
No.
So we take the whole cost of you delivering your payroll function, and then we essentially just divide it on over how many pay slips you produce in a year.
Okay.
What we find is that, like for example, we do a benchmarking report every year. So from 2012, we've done a benchmarking report, several thousand responses that we get every year. So we've got a huge amount of data. And we break it down into employer size. And we also do some we also break it down into an industry group and also payroll technology. People want to know, well, is there a certain payroll technology that works better in certain industries, for example? So we've got all that information.
Okay.
And we break down the cost by employer group. So the smaller employers will obviously have a higher cost per payroll because they haven't got those efficiencies of scale. But what we often find is an employer will say oh, the average is I've got one particular client. They've only got 50 employees. And I said, look, the average for your payroll is something that year. It was like $32 an employee per pay slip.
Okay.
And he said, no way. There was no way that he would spend $32 a pay slip in payroll. When we actually did the maths and added up all the payroll function, it was 65.
Oh boy.
So he was quite shocked. So if you do nothing other after watching this webinar than just count the total cost of your payroll function, divide it by the number of pay slips that you have in a year, and have a look at our benchmarking report to see where you sit, that would be a good outcome. The other thing that we find interesting, and it has been consistent from 2012 right through the 2019 report, is that the top performers, the top 25% of employers in the study, are on average delivering payroll at half the cost of the average.
Wow.
So if you're got a higher than average cost, the chances are you've got a lot of money that you can save if you optimise your payroll function.
Okay, interesting. So where can our audience go and find this sort of information?
Well, the benchmarking report sits on our member website.
Okay.
So you do need to be a member. But look, if your audience wanted to email me or just hit our website, we're happy to provide the RE members with it. The website is www.austpayroll.com.au, and if you contact us, we'll get a copy of the latest benchmarking report to you.
Look, in my experience in the industry to date, there seems to also be a bit of a variance depending on if payroll actually represents HR or if payroll sits under the finance team. What do you find? And I guess, do you have a recommendation for which way that should go?
This is my favourite dinner party question because it's always a debate. There is no quick answer to this one.
Of course.
Other than mine, which is I don't care.
Yep.
I honestly don't care where payroll reports, but what I do care about that it has a functional relationship with both. So obviously payroll has a monetary component, so we need to have a functional relationship with finance. We need to make sure the right figures and accruals are hitting the general ledger.
Yep.
We need to make sure we've got the right reporting so all of that should happen. Obviously it has a people component, so we need a functional relationship with HR. So again, it's reporting, it's onboarding, it's all of those things around people. So whilst I honestly don't care where payroll reports, we've got to have that good relationship with both. And one of the interesting things is the little cues and clues that we get from going into a pay office and going into an employer and getting a bit of a feel for whether they've got payroll problems. We'll often get called by HR managers and they'll say, look, can you come and have a look at our payroll process? I don't know what's wrong with it. I just can't put my finger on it, but it just doesn't seem right. And there's things I can't get and it just doesn't feel right. And what we'll actually find, one of the clues that we get is when payroll has changed reporting. It's been a bit like a hot potato. It's gone from payroll from finance to HR and back again. That is a really big clue that something is up with payroll, and oftentimes really easily fixed. So I truly don't mind where it reports as long as there's good, clear communication and that the stakeholders, both in the finance department and in the HR department, are getting exactly what they need. And that's payroll's job.
Well, that's, I think, all we've got time for today, Tracy. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I hope that our audience has got a lot of value from our session today. Thank you very much for making the time to look through this webinar today. The webinar today has been brought to you by Frontier Software, as well as our team and our friends at the Australian Payroll Association, as well as the team at the Australian Human Resources Institute. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you all and speaking to you again soon.